It's well, it's obviously people are not traveling as much. There are some people that are traveling very locally. There's a lot of frustration, a lot of pent up desire to travel. A lot of people's trips were canceled. So there's been some frustration, shall we say, around that. I arrived home on a flight last March that it was basically the last flight that was coming into Canada. It wasn't the last flight, but it was a flight to bring people home, and it was an interesting experience because we were taken to our seats. We had a little box lunch, and it was like, just stay to yourself, and and there's no service, and we're just here to get you home. It was very emotional, actually. It was very emotional. So, I haven't traveled since last March. I typically travel 2.5 to 3 months a year. And that's not happened this year. So it's been a very different year for me.
Wow. So are people like in your community and reaching out to you? Are they like planning for when they can travel? And like, is that kind of where the focus is going? And
absolutely. We can, with Google Analytics and the like, we can monitor what's going on. And our traffic dropped by about 80,000.
wow.
Yeah, in last April. So that was really interesting to drop from about 100. Well, we would run from 130 to 150,000 at any given, in a month. And we dropped to about 50. So that's what was happening in the, in the minds of travelers. It was like, this is not possible. And so a lot of people did continue to read and were interested and curious and, the like, but, that's a pretty hefty drop. Mm-hmm. So, but we're seeing it come back. So in the month of May, we hit about 94,000 to the site. So that was a 10,000, that was 10,000 over April. So we've been seeing it grow. So it's very interesting to be able to monitor what's going on, statistically, through the analytics, but also in the community. Facebook is our primary platform, and the discussion there is far more optimistic than it was a number of months ago. Certainly the vaccine was a big change for that. And then, as the rollout was happening and the like. So,
wow.
Yeah.
So having being a publisher in this industry, mm-hmm. and having this community, when the pandemic started, what were you feeling? Like because everyone I talked to, and myself included, I never imagined that, in my lifetime, I'm going to live through a pandemic where like the city's going to shut down, the country's going to shut down, where like globally we'd be going through this together. So for you, when this began and the news reports were like increasing on it, and like the talk of like a lockdown was starting, what did it feel like? And how did you kind of brace yourself to just mentally, like, how did you shift your focus or your perspective to move through this experience?
Right. Well, I've been through a couple of recessions before in terms of business. And the first thing you do is you conserve cash flow. So that's where we focused. We created a product that was just a one-off. And we brought together a lot of resources from different places that are all travel related, and we sold them. And we made a little stash that could help us with our cash flow. And so, we took advantage of government programs. We were very fortunate in Canada. I know a lot of travel bloggers that were not so fortunate, based on where they live. So we took advantage of government programs, and we really, really went conservative on how we were spending money. Right. So projects that were growth projects were cut. We weren't spending money there anymore. So there was that kind of thing. So it was all about, reducing expenses. At the same time, our clients were suffering. So it's not just a matter of what was happening to us, because we have multiple revenue streams, some dependent upon the number of people to the site, but we have all of the revenue streams were all tanking at once, which is an unusual situation. And our clients were losing oodles of money, having to cancel all of their trips, right? And they don't know whether they're going to survive or not survive. So the first thing on the revenue front that we did, so yeah, you can either, to make a profit, you've got to bring money in and you've got to slow money going out, right? And that you really have to go extreme on when it comes to a situation like that. Right. So manage the expenses, but on the revenue side, the key was to maintain the relationships with the clients. So we have direct sales to tour companies. Because we're a solo traveler, one of the biggest frustrations for solo travelers is the single supplement that is charged by tour companies traditionally if you're going alone, because they like to have two people in a room and reduces their cost and things of this nature. So the single supplement has always been a big problem. So one of our main revenue streams has been around tour companies that don't charge a single supplement, and we do direct sales to them. So the first thing we did last April is we gave all of our advertisers free advertising for the month. And that was the beginning of, we're in this with you. Yeah. Right? We will work with you as best we can to keep to keep your profile and your brand out there, while all this is going on. So that was our first move. And then we slowly, I guess it was about in June and July, we were charging about 20% of what we had been charging for our ads. Yeah. So talking about a major, major financial hit. But then so were our clients. And as a result, clients have stuck with us. Right? They've ridden this through with us, and we keep on increasing our rates, but really modestly out of respect for the situation that they're in, right? And as a result, a year and a bit later, we have a healthy future. Yeah.
Wow. So I read that in normal circumstances, it's like 150,000 monthly readership, and then 45,000 mailing monthly in regular circumstances. Just as a human being and as someone who is running this business, how do you organize to be connected to so many people, and the logistics of it, the daily, what are you keeping track of daily? How are you managing this? Do you have assistants? How are you actually communicating with so many people, right? And having it be a realistic experience where you can still have your own schedule and your own life and all of that.
You still have. Well, it's been it's 11 years. So we've had a lot of time to grow. And I say we, because while I started it solo, right, alone, now my husband does all the direct sales. So all the client-facing work is done by him. And Tracy, our editor, she does, in addition to ensuring that my biggest problem is putting question marks where question marks belong. So in addition to fixing my little mistakes in terms of my writing, she takes care of editing the material that we publish, as well as all of the Facebook communications. And that's a couple of times a day. And of course, there's a lot of monitoring that has to go on with that. Right. So, so she takes care, that's kind of her primary domain. And then I do a lot of the writing. I do all, the business side of things, special projects, new development things that we're doing, marketing, other social platforms. So that's kind of how we run things. When I'm traveling 2.5 to 3 months a year, that's jam packed. Like that's a very, very busy job.
Yeah.
With not traveling for that time this year, I have found that there's spare time. So I turned my hand to doing some volunteer work as well. And that's all been able to fit in. It's going to be interesting when the travel comes back. But I think that the way it's been organized, I think that it can be managed.
Wow. So jumping into something that I'm guessing viewers might be wondering about. So I read that you took your first solo trip when you were 15. You went on a cycling trip, and that you were inspired by your mom because she had done solo travel. For like in the average circumstances, from what I've witnessed, when people are growing up, I find that a lot of guys, like a lot of people tell guys, like, if they don't want to go to university right away, it's like, oh, take a year off, travel, do your thing. Like, and there's kind of this push towards independence, and with girls, like, and this is I'm making sweeping generalizations, but with most girls, many girls at least, it's like, when I was growing up, it was like, you're not supposed to go anywhere by yourself. Like, you're not supposed to, especially like be out after dark or things like this. I moved downtown when I was 18, and I've had an extremely like very independent life, and I didn't feel that kind of fear. I think that that type of conditioning can often leave someone as an adult. So I see on your website, I feel like there's a lot of women who probably research like solo traveling and tips and tricks. And so when you're moving through the process of like having been conditioned to be less independent and to be afraid to go to other countries, or be afraid to even like go out in your own city, like in certain neighborhoods or certain times of day, how do you help people move through that experience of like where they might have fears and blocks, like they really want to go to a country, but they're like really scared to have that experience where they're just there and they're with those people and they're just like connecting to new people, and the fear and the anxiety is just kind of like part of the process. And yeah.
So first I want to step back for a second and say that first cycling trip was a month long, and I was not by myself. I took a tour. Okay, so just to make sure, my mother, I didn't write a postcard home for about 3 weeks. My mother was freaking, but but it was not totally solo. That being said, I grew up in Ottawa, and at least my teen years in Ottawa, and I did a lot of day trips out of the city on my bike by myself.
Wow.
Right. So I think part of it is around experiencing independence and being by yourself when you're at home, I think is a really important thing.
Yeah.
So when it comes to an adult who is for the first time thinking about traveling by themselves, certainly start small, right? Go somewhere where the culture is familiar, like the next town, the next city, where you feel safe, right? Or if you are a more experienced traveler, maybe go where English is spoken. Go to the UK, something of that nature. But start small. Be patient with yourself, and be smart. So there are certain things that it's really important to do when you're traveling solo. For one thing, just know that a public space is safer than a private space. So if you are traveling and you meet people, which you often do as you travel solo, and someone says, hey, come to this party, or whatever it is, you might want to decline, because you are putting yourself in a situation that you have no control over, right? Whereas if you're in a public space, you have lots of control over that. If you go to a restaurant with a pile of people and you're not, not keen on the scene, you can walk out, right? If you're in someone's home in the suburbs or somewhere, in a place beyond your regular space, that gets trickier. So just really be aware from a safety perspective that public is safer than private, right? The other thing that I recommend is really taking the initiative. If you're nervous, take the initiative yourself in terms of finding help. So if you're looking very vulnerable, you might not want anyone coming up to help you, but you might want to look around and find the person you want to help. So you might say, I'm going to approach that family there, or that couple, or something of that nature, right? I came out of a play in New York City one time, and I got turned around, and I've got a pretty good sense of direction, but I got turned around, and I knew that the park was north, but I did not know which was north, which way was north. Yeah. And that's all I needed, right? And I found who I approached, and I said, which way is the park, right? Got that? Okay, I'm good. So really making your own decision. But another thing is that so much of the television series, Netflix series, all of this kind of thing revolves around problems. Revolves around like how many serial killer shows can there be? So I really say, go cold turkey on those. Yeah. Right? And really, kind of get more perspective on what the world is actually like.
Yeah.
So that you can travel with a bit more confidence. But there are hundreds of tips, that will help you stay safe. But those are just a few broad-based things to think about.
And for people who are a little bit more experienced at solo traveling, and they do want to go somewhere where there's a little bit more like political unrest, are there kind of general rules for that, or like where there's a place where they're a little bit more worried about traveling, but they really want to go? And yeah.
Well, I think of places like, sometimes Mexico, people are worried about. Back a couple of decades, it was Northern Ireland.
Wow.
Places that people would want to go to, but were nervous about. And it was when I was traveling in Mexico that I related my experience to Northern Ireland, because I had family there. And it was then that I really learned that what is in the general, public sphere in terms of information through the news is the lowlights or highlights, like the most intense things that are reported. And they tend to be in very specific places as opposed to in the entire country. Right. So to do your research and know where it's safe to go and where it's not safe to go, I think is really important. And then when you're actually into a city, right, then really do your research locally, right? Ask a bartender, I want to go to this, this theater or this club or whatever. Is this in a good zone or a bad zone, right? And just know what you're getting into. It's really important, and play it conservatively, right? So that you are going, because there's so much to do in this world. Why do it in places that are dangerous, right? Oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah.
And for people who are worried because they don't have like as much money, and they're kind of worried about like where they're going to stay might not be as safe, or like even the building, like the hotel or the hostel or wherever, for people, and I imagine like a lot of young people do that, like where they don't have like as much money saved or whatever. How, what is something like super general around having less financial freedom while traveling that can help us feel safer and more stable, like with the experience?
Well, hostels are a great way. I go to hostels still. I love them. right? Because they're social, because you learn about the cheapest things to do that are the best things to do, right? So it's not only a cheap place to stay, but it's a great place to find other great cheap things to do, great places to eat that are cheap, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So hostels are wonderful in that regard. And if you use a site like Hostel World, where you're seeing real people's reviews of the hostel, then you can get a pretty good sense of what kind of hostel you're going into, because there are a variety of hostels, right? There are party hostels and there are family hostels, and you want to know which you want. So read the reviews and you'll find the ones that are best for you, right? The other thing is that, when it comes to travel, the longer if you have to fly, for example, the flight is going to be expensive. So the longer you can travel, the less that expense has any bearing on anything, right? So if you want to go to Southeast Asia or South America, right, and you fly there, but that flight is going to, be amortized, if you will, over 4 weeks, well, then that flight is less significant, because your hostel might be, $10 a night, right? So you have to think about where you're going. North America and Europe are more expensive, without a doubt. So destination can make a huge difference. And there are so many great destinations that are not, like, if you want to go to Europe and you don't have much money, go to Slovenia, right? Go to Slovenia is a wonderful country. It feels, my interpretation when I was there, I thought, this must be what Italy was like in the 50s, right? Because it had that relaxed feeling, but the very Italian influence as well as Austrian influence. Great country, way less expensive than going to Italy.
Right.
Right. So choose your destination well, and read the hostel reviews.
So I read that your previous business was in trade shows and conferences that was sold in 2000. So what inspired you to get into entrepreneurship when you were entering that? And then also, how did that experience of running that type of business, how did that inform what you're doing now? Like, how did it prepare you and inform you for this journey?
Wow. So growing up, my father worked the corporate ladder. And one of the things he said is that I always have a boss. Doesn't matter how high I go, I'm always going to have a boss. As opposed to, if you work for yourself, you are your boss. And therefore you can design your business according to what's of interest to you, right? So there was that kind of in the background. I worked for a conference and trade show company for a number of years, but 3 years maybe. And basically I got paid to learn how the business works, right? And I think that's one of the great things that launches a lot of entrepreneurs, is you get your education by watching what's going on in other businesses, right? So wanted to make a move to Toronto, and I actually freelanced for that company for a number of years, maybe a year. And then decided with my husband that, we wanted to launch ourselves. And so completely different market sector, like there was no conflict, lots of support from our previous boss, and then launched the conference and trade show business.
Wow.
So that's kind of how got into it, and launched during a recession. Well, recession started about a year later.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then how did those years help you and prepare you for this business now?
Oh, I mean, there's nothing like scrambling to be successful. That's going to teach you so much, right? I think the first year we lost, I don't know, about 60 grand, which was a lot of money to us, right? And I wrote letters to each of the major suppliers and said, we can't pay you right now, but we will pay you, and we'll pay you at this rate. and we will be loyal to you if you can accept these terms. And they all accepted the terms, and we did pay off those bills, and we were loyal to them, right? So it was a real education in terms of, how do you get financing? Well, you can get financing from your suppliers sometimes, which you have to keep in mind when someone's not paying their bill very quickly to you, because basically they're financing their business off of you, right? So there's one thing to do it up front, with a little bit of humility and commitment. And another thing, when a company just doesn't pay their bill, says, oh no, we never pay anything for 60 days or 90 days or something of that nature.
Yeah.
Well, they're just financing their business off of you. So I don't consider that fair game. But anyways, that's how we rode out the recession, and learned that, basically cash flow is everything. If you don't have cash flow, you can be kind of running a profit on your paper, but if you don't have the cash coming in so that you can cover the expenses going out, you don't have a business. Right. So learned a lot about cash flow and how long it takes to be profitable, right? And it took about 5 years.
Wow.
Yeah. And that was okay. We were doing fine, and we were feeding the kids, and
yeah.
Right? It's all going, but we made that profit. That year we did 6 weeks in Europe.
Wow.
Yeah, we blew it all. What can I say?
So for people that go through that journey where they're willing to make the commitment, it might take someone 1 year, 3 years, it might take them 10 years. What is what's the main, for you, what would you say is the main way to stay focused, motivated, inspired when you don't know how long your particular journey is going to take before you're super stable? Before you know that point, how do you stay motivated?
Well, I think that's going to really depend upon the individual and what the nature of their business is. But, one thing I can say for sure is that you do not have to have any fancy bookkeeping program, QuickBooks or anything like that. Knowing where you're going financially is really addition and subtraction. So to be able to project forward what's happening, to monitor what's happening all the time, is a really important piece of knowing where you're going and that this is a road worth continuing on, right? I should say when we sold the business in 2000, it was to a multinational, and it was, it was like a 6-month sale. It takes a long time, and multinationals, they're just business heads, they're and they would call it the most inconvenient times, right? And say, we need this or the deal's off. It's one time it was, we had 20 people here for a Christmas dinner. It was before Christmas, 4 or 5 days before Christmas. But it was, and I just had to say, okay, then the deal's off, because I cannot do that now, right? But then very close to closing, so we're dealing with a VP, right, for the deal. And then close to closing, we get the president calling. This is all head games that they play, right? And he wanted to know what the results were this year for sales versus previous years. And because it was an event, right? It was more event-based. And not only could I tell him what we were compared to previous years, I could tell him what it was on a daily basis. 20 days out from the event, 19 days out from the event, 18 days. So the tracking was really valuable, because I could tell whether we were on track for more revenue or less revenue. And we could then be agile around our marketing, save money on marketing, spend more on marketing. We could do all of that because we were tracking it. But what was really entertaining to me was that it was that 11th hour call from the president that was there designed to kind of put me under his thumb, and I had all that information tracked.
Wow.
So, and it was addition and subtraction, just writing it down, just monitoring what's going on. So knowing what's going on in your business, I think, tells you whether this business is worth pursuing, and also tells you, if it's stumbling, why and where it's stumbling. So, the money side of things is not considered to be the most fun part of it, but it really, really is helpful.
Yeah. And you traveled for 10 months before starting Solo Traveler?
Yeah.
That's what I saw. What was that experience like? And how did that inspire you to move into this stage?
Well, so as I said, the first year we made a profit, we were off to Europe for 5 weeks, right? So travel, my first trip was at 15. Travel has been part of my entire life. So that was kind of a no-brainer. When we sold the company, that's when we did the 10 months on the road. Came home and my husband was ill and he passed away in 2006. Over the course of his illness and afterwards, I turned to freelance writing because, as my brother who nudged me into this said, you have to do something, right? I just can't be worried and caring for him. So I started this freelance writing business. And then after my husband passed, it was like a couple of years later, and the grief was going again. And I said, I guess I'm traveling solo. And so I said that one Saturday in February, and the next day I started the blog because it made perfect sense. It was my entrepreneurial knowledge. It was my writing skills. It was my passion for travel. What I needed to learn was the online world. And of course, learning's fun. So that's how I got into Solo Traveler.
And how did, when you were moving through the grief transforming into creation, what were some of the maybe stages or themes where you started to feel better or feel more inspired or happier or even, because now you're married again, right? So even that process of meeting someone new or having, I don't know, just kind of opening again. What was that like?
Yeah, well, it was 2 years, just over 2 years after my husband passed, that I started Solo Traveler. And truly, it was my path out. It was absolutely, because all of a sudden I had something that was really grabbing my bandwidth, my brain space, right? And I had so much to learn and so much to figure out. And I built the first site, right? Not knowing anything about building a blog. So there was just so much there was just so much to learn and so much to do that I was busy. So it's not like being busy when you're in grief and you're just trying to be busy and your brain's all foggy. I was busy because I had gone through my grieving process and I was ready to really take something on. But the interesting thing is that then, of course, I started traveling solo and doing more. I'd done a little bit before, but I did more. And I realized how much of my late husband that I was taking with me. So he was a photographer, and I started realizing how I see things more through his eyes, than before. And I am an introvert. He was a very big extrovert. And I realized that I had gathered some of his qualities along the way. They're for an introvert to start acting like an extrovert, all they are is techniques. But I had them, right? And I learned them by watching him. So, that's pretty sweet. Pretty sweet.
And did you meet your person now traveling?
No. I met him online.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So good.
Yeah.
So I watched this interview with you, and you guys were talking about something really, really interesting, that traveling solo boosts confidence, feeling capable. And what really stood out for me was like, you guys were talking about that it makes you take full responsibility, and that actually alters your memory of the experience.
Oh,
So
yeah.
like, so you have a better memory of the experience of traveling. And I just found that, like, I found that so, like, it just grabbed me, that concept that, like, actually planning everything, how it impacts the mind and our retention and our attention. So can you kind of, from your own experience and then from your experience of your clients and your community, like, how have you, like, how has that kind of informed like the way the rest of the way that you live your life, or like how does it inform the way that you perceive things?
And you know, when you've been doing it for 10 years, it's kind of hard to be aware of all those steps along the way. But you know, when you travel with other people, everyone has their strengths. You know, someone knows how to find the right restaurant, and someone knows how to develop the route for the, you know, for the road trip. And, you know, so it's all kind of shared. And the thing about remembering it better is because you have made all those decisions, right? For good and for bad, you made them all. So I think that that's why the memory piece is so much better. But also, when you return home, that decision-making process is with you as well. And therefore, I think that, you know, there's some ability to be, you know, somewhat more decisive, somewhat more prepared to choose a path, as opposed to having taken the one that's just presented to you, or the, you know, the least resistance kind of situation. So I think that it's, you know, that's all talking about empowerment. It's talking about feeling capable. It's talking about making those decisions. And I mean, how old is your audience? Is your audience a young audience, or?
It's very like my market. I want it to be like a younger audience and like startup people. But I've noticed that it's like it's strangely varied, where there's some young people and then there's this gap. Like there's kind of like this gap. And then there's people that are like more in their 40s and 50s. And so it's been a strange, like that's been strange to me, where I have like almost like a 25, like 25 to like 35 gap, which is so weird because I'm 32. Yeah. But
But
then
it's
it
a,
tends to be like the younger and the older.
yeah, yeah. And actually that fits with the demographics for solo traveler.
Really?
Yeah. So our number one demo, despite my age, is our millennials, right?
Wow.
In their 20s and early 30s. And then the second one are the boomers, like 60 plus, right? But the thing about the empowerment that solo travel offers you is that when you're in your 20s and you have spent the majority of your life being guided by parents, by the school system or whatever, and you get out there on your own, that's an incredible feeling to be making all of these decisions. And so you return home with that, that experience is now integrated. It's part of you, right? You make decisions. This is really powerful for someone in their 20s, right? If you are in, you know, your 50s and you've been guiding maybe your kids or whatever, right? Or at work, coworkers or whatever. And suddenly you can make decisions just for you. It's a whole other game as well.
Wow.
Right? So it's kind of the flip side of it. And it's that freedom and and being able to determine what time you get up in the morning, Whether you're having a coffee first or no, you're going to get in that line first, right? And all these things, and just doing things according to your own schedule, which after 40, 50 years of doing things according to other people's schedule is a pretty empowering thing, right? But in both cases, the one thing that people come home with is a unique experience where people will look at you and go, huh, you're a pretty strong person, right? And I think that that's pretty cool, because I think that it makes 20-somethings, not only is it within themselves, but when people learn that they've taken in trips of this nature, people look at them differently. Well, you've got to be a strong person, right? And for people in their 40s, 50s, and let's say 50s, 60s, who've done this, and then they go back at work, then they're not looked at as quite so staid or boring or things like that. They're looked at as adventurous. So there's something about solo travel that does very cool things for people.
So when someone, like, let's say for a young person, they go somewhere by themselves, and because of just their personality, or like they get kind of caught up in, like, they partied really hard, they might have fallen in love with someone, now they don't want to come back home, or they come back home but they like, their love is now in another country. For those type of experiences, do people like talk to you about it, like, or do people, is there, when people are kind of like, they travel and then they have those kind of really like high sensory experiences that are maybe not as responsible, what do they like, I don't know, what do they like, what do they ask about, or like what are they asking about if they, like, partied super hard somewhere, or they, I don't know, they fell in love, or they ended up in debt, like they came back with like spending way more money than they expected. What are they asking about, and like how do they kind of move through that experience?
Well, I mean, I don't get the question very often. I get the question more about, should I stay or should I go? That's the kind of question that I get more often, right? Oh, I was supposed to be going to school right now, like, but I really want to travel. Should I stay or should I go? Or, things of that nature. But, when it comes to partying too hard or falling in love, kind of have to sit back and put it in perspective, right? Hey, if you party really hard and had a good time, but that's that, right? And you're not going to replicate that at home. And you're probably not going to replicate it on the road again, right? Because sometimes things just collide and amazing things can happen. So there's that. When it comes to falling in love, I have known people that have fallen in love on the road. And it's a tricky business. Right? So are you falling in love with the person, or are you falling in love with the time, the place, both of you are in a really free environment, like neither of you have responsibilities, all this kind of thing. So I have yet, and it's not that I've not heard of success, but I've yet to seen a successful couple come that way.
Right.
I've heard of it, but I've not seen it myself.
How do you balance like that? Because traveling, because of what, like that feeling when you go somewhere and you don't have responsibilities and you can decide like what you're doing all day, and how do you balance as a person and as an entrepreneur, that aspect of like, okay, now I need to I need to focus on my responsibilities, I need to do the detail oriented things, I need to do the books, I need to do the paperwork. How do you balance that within yourself of like when to be kind of enjoying and like having more sensory experience, and then when to be like focused and disciplined? How has that journey been for you?
I typically work at night when I travel. So unless, I like to go to music venues. I'm usually traveling in a country I don't know the language. So music is perfect, right? So whether it's the opera, which I never go to at home, but I like seeing the scene, because if you're in Europe, opera is a scene. So whether it's, music, or whether it's a jazz club or whatever it is, unless I've got something specific I'm going to in the evening, I usually spend my evenings doing that work that I have to do. And otherwise, my days are free.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then in Toronto, you're in Toronto, right?
Yeah.
In Toronto, how do you balance like your work life, your social life, your health and well-being? Like, do you have a philosophy? Do you have a kind of a strategy that's developed over time?
Well, I guess, it's not surprising that one would develop a pattern, right? I'm out usually by about 7:30 in the morning. This morning I cycled. I cycled to Leslie Street Spit, the lighthouse, Tommy Thompson Park, it's called, right? So, that's a good 23, 24-kilometer ride, and it's beautiful. It's beautiful. So I always try to, I live relatively close to the water. So I always try to start at the water, start my day with time at the water, whether I'm walking, whether I'm riding or whatever. And that's year round. So I start my day out the door because my mornings are my most productive time. But I also need I'm a person that wakes up with tons of stuff in their head. So I need to go out to kind of sift through what's in my head and kind of come back with one or two things that I'm actually going to act on. So that's my well-being piece, balancing with work. And then, as I say, I've picked up some volunteer work this year because things slowed down with Solo Traveler. And as I say, if I'm traveling, 1/4 of the year, you can bet that there was a lot of compression when I was home. So that's not the case now. So, I integrate other things that are very fulfilling. Yeah.
When people are traveling and they're going somewhere where they're like nervous about the weather, like they're going on a ship to Antarctica, they're going somewhere where it's going to be really hot, and they're kind of nervous, like they're kind of worried because I'm that type of person. Like if I was going somewhere really cold or really hot, I would be kind of stressed out about it before I get there. What's like with weather and temperature? What's something that people like can kind of how what's a way that they can plan or think about it, or not just like for clothes, but like just the mental aspect of worrying about it? What's something that they can do?
Never worried about it myself. But certainly, like I've got the weather app on my phone, and I always put my destination into the weather app so that I'm tracking what's going on there as well. And that kind of shifts me mentally in terms of where I'm going. But the thing is that no place is one thing, right? So like going to the Arctic, yes. When I went there, I pretty well had a sense of what I was dealing with, and it was consistent. But I went to Sicily, and it was going to be really, really hot. But one day we went up Mount Etna, and it's cold up there.
Wow.
Right? So there's that confusion. And when I went to India, I went at the end of January, very tail end of January, and into February. But it was really cold, and it never occurred to me that India would be cold.
Wow.
Right? But you're living in marble rooms, and the cold is really kept, and that's great for the hot season, but for the colder seasons. So I guess research, because I did not research very well how cold it was going to be at the top of Mount Etna, nor what it was going to be like in the Himalayas where I was. So research is definitely going to help you. Putting it on your phone and tracking it is going to help you. But in terms of packing, I still find it hard to flip upside down and go, yeah, I'm leaving Toronto in -5, -15 degrees, and I'm going to Australia and it's going to be 40. And it's just like, It confuses me.
Yeah.
I just kind of go, okay, summer, and I bring out all my summer stuff, right?
Yeah.
So it is a tricky one.
And for, like you mentioned before, that you go places where you may not know the language. For people that are like, that get anxiety, like social anxiety, when they don't know the language, and then even if they have like a book or they're kind of studying the language before they go, like common phrases that they might need, how does someone kind of rest with the social anxiety of things like taking longer because we can't communicate, or not knowing who to talk to or where to go? Like, what are some of the things that you do and you recommend for other people?
Well, I mean, first off, Google Translate's amazing, right? So just having that app on your phone and using it to communicate is really great. The other thing is that, really take it light. I mean, it's not necessarily easy, but try to be lighthearted about it, right? Because if you're charming, people will allow you all sorts of grace in terms of how long it takes you to communicate something or whatever. And so, yeah, try to make their experience fun, because they see you trying and smiling, and the struggle is not a terrible struggle. It's actually a struggle to communicate with new people, and that can be magical. So try to have that kind of attitude, and usually people are quite engaged with it. I was in France in a post office once with a big lineup behind me, and I'm trying to get out what I need to be said. And everyone behind me was just having such a good time trying to help me, because it was really a small village in France, right? There was no English, right? So it's just, it's fun. And then, of course, you can always mime things, right? I was in Chile, and the ferry I was on hit an island, and it was late, and I went to the hotel that I had booked, and I didn't want to pay for that night, and so I went to explain this, and so that they wouldn't charge me, and there was no English. And so I had to do, I said Ila and ferry, and they understood. And I said ferry, and they went, oh goodness, the ferry hit the island. They knew it,
Wow.
right? So there's certain things you can do. You can order meat by, ba or mu, right? There's all sorts of things you can do that are actually in other people's lives quite delightful.
Yeah. Wow. And for people that are maybe they're not only are they not used to solo traveling, but they're not used to international traveling. What are some of the things, like for people that have anxiety going on planes, on boats? Like, are there something that, like, little things that can help them?
Those are tricky things, because it also depends upon the anxiety itself.
Right.
Right. So, fear of flying is a really true thing, and not easy for people. And that's where, I would really suggest getting your own coach to help you through it. Right. My fear is getting seasick. Right. Because I do, but I still go on boats. And I still, figure it out. And I know how rough the water can be. And if it gets too rough, I'm on the top deck and I'm looking at the horizon and I am making it, right?
Wow.
So you got to know what your strategies are should things, go in a way that's a little bit tricky for you.
Right. Wow. And so for people that are going solo somewhere where they're totally solo versus people that are joining a group, what are, like, some of the kind of differences that you recommend to the people that are going with a group of people they don't know? They're meeting a bunch of people at the same time, and they're going to be staying with them and traveling with them, and like they kind of have to get along with them. And maybe they're kind of scared about that. And then versus like someone who goes by themselves, and like where you mentioned before, they can decide who to talk to.
Right.
So when someone can't, like, they don't know everyone who's going to be in the group, and they're kind of worried about being with the same group of people for 2 weeks or however long, what are some things that can help them?
So I'm going to divide this into two categories. So one is the classic tour, ground tour, and the other is a cruise, a river cruise, something of that nature. So on the classic ground tour, you are with the same group of people, right? And eventually the group kind of solidifies in different directions, right? Certain people kind of team up and other people don't, or whatever. But I would suggest not, teaming up too soon. Try to work your way around. If they're different tables for meals, go make the circuit before you settle in on someone and then discover 2 days later that, oh, you really don't want to spend all this time with them. And then you're in an awkward situation of, kind of trying to break away and stuff like that. The other thing is, ask open-ended questions, right? Where are you from? Well, I'm from Toronto. Closed, right? What made you decide to take this tour, right? Why Morocco? Things of that nature are more open-ended, and they allow you to enter into that, into the space with this person and get more feel of who they are. And it also makes them feel interesting, right? That makes them feel more at ease with you as well. One of the things I like asking people is like, what's your story? Right? Everyone's got a story. Right. And it can sometimes take people aback. Well, I'm kind of ordinary. I don't really have a story. Everyone's got a story. Right. So if you can kind of poke around in that space, it's kind of fun. And again, it makes people feel really great. So it's kind of the same thing on a cruise, except with a cruise, everyone goes and sits down at a meal at the same time or whatever, and you can truly get stuck with the same people. And so I say when I sit down at a table, I say, so great to meet you, really enjoying this. I'm having such fun. I go to a different table every night and I'm meeting all these new people. And so I set it up, the expectation right from the beginning that I'm not necessarily going to be here, the next night and the next night and the next night.
Right.
Yeah.
And what's something, looking back on your entrepreneurship journey,
Mm-hmm.
what's something that you wished you knew when you started, like right at the beginning? What's something that you know now that you wish you knew then?
That's a really tricky one. I can flip that upside down for you. What am I glad I didn't know at the beginning?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm glad I didn't know how hard it was going to be.
Wow.
Right? Because it's not easy. It's really hard work and it's long hours and it's constantly learning because every client's going to be different. And, just about every client will give you a different challenge. And there's all sorts of things that go on. But I would never, ever have given up this path, the entrepreneurial course. I would never have given that up, for a corporate position, because I've been able to modify the work that I do over 3 different businesses according to my life and my lifestyle at the time. So I'm glad I didn't know it was going to be such hard work.
Wow. And for people, like especially like younger startup people, when they're worried about taking on more responsibility, because I feel like as a millennial, that's been a huge struggle. Like I remember writing an article about boomerang babies where they like move out of their parents' house, then they move back in, and then they move out and they move back in. And I think that for a lot of young people today, like we really struggle, or they struggle with, I'm not that young anymore, but like we really struggle with responsibility and like taking on responsibility and feeling capable of that and feeling confident enough to say, make decisions and just believe that we can do it, kind of thing. So for young people that are struggling with that, who are in the startup phase or they are thinking of starting something, But we're looking at like, you know, the Mark Zuckerbergs and the Elon Musks and being like, I don't know how to do this. And like, you know, like Mark Zuckerberg was like so young when he kind of launched. And so for this generation who's like looking at these people on social media constantly and listening to the videos of their advice, and it's like, it can be so overwhelming and we can feel so like not adequate. You know, what's something for young people to just help them take that step and like be focused on their vision and just believe that everything's going to be okay and they have what it takes?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, first off, don't believe everything you see on social media,
Mhm.
right? Everyone's making it look way better than it is.
Yeah.
So it's really important to keep in mind. But the other thing is to find your cheerleaders, right? So, you know, your parents might be really doubtful that this is a good idea. I know my father didn't think it was a good idea when we started our first business. It's like he's thinking, you have 3 kids at home and you're going to start doing something and you don't know if you're going to make any money, right? So he was not a cheerleader. He was a cheerleader once we were up and running. Yeah, he was very excited for us because that's where he thought everyone should be. But he was very nervous for us. So finding the cheerleaders in your life it's really important, because whether or not they know anything about what you're doing, right, or how to do it, they are supportive. And then of course, network and find other entrepreneurs that are going through a similar thing, right? And that will help you along as well. But bottom line, you need to be confident in yourself. And if you have to move back home, right, know that you're doing it for a reason, right? And track where things are going financially, you know, with a number of clients, because diversifying is as important as making money, right? All of these, just track what's going on and being able to watch things improve, that will give you confidence as well. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah. And for women in business, what has your journey been with regards to like, did you have a time where you felt like that was a challenge or that people didn't take you as seriously? How did you move through that, like with age or gender, when people are going through these? Yeah, like how did it feel to you?
Yeah, there have been times when, because I did this business with my husband, and because he was such an outgoing personality, it did feel sometimes like I was just considered to be not as important in the whole scheme of things. But I think that is not a significant factor in what's going on. There was a time where I took a business trip as opposed to my husband because of something going on with our kids. And the client was disappointed that it was me.
Wow.
Right. And I thought, you jerk. You have no idea what I do in the company and that this is a joint venture. So you really have to just kind of set those things aside. That being said, one thing about being an entrepreneur as a woman is that you hold the cards, right? There's no one else holding the cards other than you. And that's very cool, right? That's, there's no one that is restricting you. There's no question about, oh, you know, I don't know if I can promote you because maybe you're going to have kids next year. There's none of that goes on.
Right.
Right. You have kids whether you want, you know, whether your business, whatever your business is going, because you can adapt your business around you having kids. Yeah. I did. Right. So, so being an entrepreneur as a woman, I think, is a great thing because it puts you in control of your life and your work and your career.
Wow. Where can viewers find the Solo Traveler's Handbook?
Oh, it's on Instagram. Sorry, not Instagram. It's on Amazon. in various places like that. But that was written in 2012. Technology has changed an awful lot since then. So really, you're better off going to the website, to going to solotravelerworld.com, and the information is much more current.
Okay. And we can follow you there on your website and on Facebook?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, on Facebook, on Instagram. And, also you can sign up for our newsletter. And, one of the things that we do have is we are the only list of tours with no or very low single supplements on the net, coming from a variety of different, tour companies. So it's a great resource for people that want to travel solo, but on a tour.
And for the last question, what do you wish that people asked you about more? Or what do you wish people were more curious about?
Oh, what an interesting question. Oh, goodness. I really am not certain, because I'm an introvert, right? It's not like I'm seeking all sorts of, questions like this. But, this kind of interview I love, because if I can encourage, people to be entrepreneurs, I just think it's a great lifestyle. Yeah. So ask me any questions about being an entrepreneur. I guess maybe that's the answer.
Yeah.